Now, as we all know, Cooler is the closest Frostling in Universe 7 to being anywhere near good. While he isn't above conquering planets in canon, he does seem to treat his men well in both the movies and games. He often rewards loyalty and will step in to personally fight opponents too strong for his men, whilst never ridiculing or threatening them for their failures. Honestly, that's pretty good for someone from the Cold family, and that's something we can use. We start this what if with the birth of Cooler, something that absolutely delighted King Cold. Whilst he grew up, the Frost Demon showed promise with the managerial aspects of ruling, and even had a pretty tactical mind when it came to taking over planets. However, when it came to actually taking them, Cooler never went to extremes or pushed his men too hard, something Cold noticed. The king would attempt to convince his progeny that these men were nothing but tools, that casualties were natural and he shouldn't worry about them. But Cooler always pushed back, saying his men would fight harder if they were well rested and respected the commander they fought under. Now, this really got under Cold's skin, but not as much as what Cooler started doing in the coming years. The Frostling began actually fighting battles with his men, even going as far as to fight alongside those filthy Saiyans. No. Cold could not condone his own son fighting alongside these grunts. It was one thing to delay the acquisition of planets, but to be in the trenches was too far. That day, Cold took matters into his own hands and confronted his son. Cooler had just taken over a planet with a squad of Saiyans and was congratulating them when Cold's ship landed. Suddenly, 4 beams flew out, striking each Saiyan in the chest, ending them in an instant. "Why would you do such a thing, father?" Cooler asked, seeing Cold holding a single finger up. "Do what? Those Saiyans served their purpose. There was no reason to keep them around. As for you, now that remains to be seen." Cold glared at his son before taking a few steps forward, his second form towering over Cooler. The Iceling didn't back down though. He stood his ground and gave the same old argument about how valuable his soldiers were. This only got a sigh out of Cold, who aimed his finger towards his son. "We do not fraternize with these low-class grunts, Cooler. That is why they had to be disposed of. If they begin thinking they're our comrades, they may get too big for their britches and attempt rebellion. And then what would happen to all your precious soldiers? We are simply a caliber above these cretins. That's something you need to learn, and learn quickly." And with that, Cold left, not even bothering to bury the soldiers he ended. This left Cooler feeling even angrier about his father, but he knew the king would eventually have to retire. And retire he did, but he didn't leave the empire to Cooler. Oh no. While the Iceling was out conquering planets, Cold had been busy birthing another son. See, it had been a couple years, and while Cooler established his own armored squadron comprised of elite warriors to fight with, he still fought with low-class warriors and took over planets with as little bloodshed as possible. This, along with his relatively low battle power, left Cold with little choice, and thus Frieza was born. Now, this time the king was nothing but pleased from the start. Cooler was always able to figure things out, hardly needing his father's instruction, and while Frieza was intelligent, he always needed advice from the tyrant, something he quite enjoyed. Not to mention, Frieza had an insane amount of power compared to Cooler, and while he was initially nice to the lower class, he soon learned he was far better than them, and treated them accordingly. In only 2 short years, Frieza had become what Cold always wished Cooler could be. Within a week of Frieza inheriting the Empire, Cooler had been pushed to the side and made completely obsolete in the grand scheme of things. Many of his soldiers were transferred to other planets, and the Iceling was given a small solar system on the edge of the Empire to stay on. Now this, of course, angered Cooler, but what really got to him was the approach to capturing planets that Frieza had. He often decimated the native populations, leaving the planets barren and war-torn. Whilst not caring about the casualties his own forces ensued. What's worse is whenever Cooler attempted to give his little brother advice, Cold always intercepted their communication, usually outright blocking Cooler. The Frost Demon knew if he could only get in contact with his little brother that he could change his ways, show him that there was a better way to rule. In Cooler's mind, Frieza had been manipulated and turned into the evil tyrant his father always wanted. That's why they weren't allowed to communicate. In the end though, Cooler was disowned and left with a platoon's worth of soldiers to guard a single solar system that had only one hospitable planet. Despite the dishonor and humiliation of this move, Cooler didn't really care about what happened to him. What he really cared about was the civilization's Cold was responsible for ending. The Iceling thought about usurping his father and brother for years, and trained to do so, even going as far as to train with his best men, this being Naze, Dori, and Salza. But he could never scratch the surface of what Frieza could do. Even so, the Iceling had his men begin spying on the Frieza force and their activities. Apparently hundreds of planets had been conquered, with the remaining civilians being forced to work in factories, or the force itself. This appalled Cooler, who began training harder, eventually developing the ability to sense ki, but not to transform, not yet at least. One day, while training, Salza would run over, telling Cooler of a planet in the next solar system that was being destroyed by the Frieza force. While the Frost Demon still felt unprepared to fight his brother, he couldn't just let an entire race get destroyed when he was so close to them. Not to mention they did kinda trade for supplies with this same planet. Cooler gathered his armored squad and flew off to do what he could against the invading force of planet Cereal. The spaceship took an agonizingly long time to get there, so much so that by the time Cooler arrived, the planet had already been devastated. But from what Naze and Salza could see, there were still some surviving life forms on the planet, this including a few transformed Saiyans though. Cooler, without much hesitation, destroyed Cereal's moon, then ordered his men to land their ship. Once they were in the atmosphere, he flew out, telling his men to stay on the ship and be ready to retreat. The Iceling immediately happened upon a group of Saiyans beating up a singular Cerulean, who kept attempting to block these attacks but ultimately failed. Cooler swiftly blew up the Saiyan scouters before knocking each of them out with one punch. He then turned to the Cerulean, who had passed out but was still alive, and could be saved. The Cerulean was taken to Cooler's ship and placed within a healing chamber, while Cooler asked if there were any other living beings on the planet. With a quick scan, Salza managed to find that there were indeed several more life forms nearby. Cooler had Salza plug the location into his scouter, and they quickly flew off. They arrived to see Bardock, two Ceruleans, and a Namekian, along with the Heaters. And now Cooler feels some trepidation. He's heard the Heaters may have some fighting prowess, but their real power lies in their ability to gather information. If Cooler intervened, they'd for sure attempt to use this as some sort of blackmail, or perhaps go straight to Cold. He'd have to be quick if he were to avoid the Heater's wrath. He powers up just as Alec prepares to off Muesli, and flies straight towards the blue man, only to be blindsided by gas, though the distraction does cause Alec to miss his shot, hitting the Cerulean woman in the arm instead. This leaves Bardock, Cooler, and the Heaters in a three-way, almost deadlock. Alec, seeing the brother of Frieza and a clearly angered Bardock, slowly backs away behind his minions. Now, Bardock wasn't much to worry about, but even Alec knew he shouldn't mess with the brother of Lord Frieza. But for as scared as he isn't above using subtle threats, such as alluding to the Saiyan's demise and the possibility of Frieza finding out about Cooler's spying. Without another word though, Alec and his goons leave, much to the relief of Cooler. While he certainly could have fought them off, he knew that would only cause even more trouble down the line. But this did leave him alone with Bardock, Muesli, and Monito, three people he never would have thought he'd see together. "You there, Saiyan. You weren't really going to capture these three, were you?" "And what's it to you? Why are you even on this planet? Did Frieza send you to make sure we did our jobs correctly?" Bardock crossed his arms, staring down the Iceling. "You Saiyan mongrel, respect Misho Cooler when speaking to him." Salsa jumped between the Saiyan and Iceling, activating his Keyblade, which Bardock did not appreciate. Before the situation escalated any further, the Frost Demon stepped in and motioned for Bardock to mute his scouter. This caught the Saiyan's attention, and he did as he was told. While Cooler didn't exactly trust this Saiyan, he knew Bardock was popular amongst the low class, the vast majority of Saiyans, and from this brief encounter, he could tell he was something special. The Iceling explained that he was here to save the Ceruleans, something that obviously didn't quite work out. The Saiyan was pretty unimpressed until Cooler mentions that he plans on causing a rebellion, something Bardock had thought of but never seriously considered. The Saiyan Maverick couldn't promise he'd fight with Cooler, but he did say that if someone threatened his family, he'd fight them, even if it was Frieza. The Iceling accepted this. He didn't need warriors just yet, but just sowing the seeds of dissent helped his potential rebellion grow. However, for every step Cooler took forward, it seemed he took two back, as Salza reported that Frieza's mothership had spotted theirs, and were attacking it. Cooler cursed himself for not realizing Frieza was close by, but he and Salza quickly flew towards their spaceship. The two got there within minutes, but all they saw was the ship on the ground with the engine smoking. Naze was waiting outside for them, and reported that Frieza's ship downed theirs before flying south. South? Wait, that's towards... Monsieur Cooler, could he be? You three stay here. I'm going to stop him. Cooler flew off as his men protested, entering space within seconds, but for as quick as he was, he just couldn't catch up to Frieza's ship. Upon arriving at his base, Cooler saw said ship sitting there, and in front of it, a mound of bodies. The Iceling gasped and held his breath, nearing closer to the men who used to be under his command. Just like that, in an instant, 30 men were put to rest. Cooler was too late to save the Ceruleans, and now he was too late to save his own subordinates. These were the people he ate with, went on patrol with, hung out with, and now they were gone. Oh, there you are, dear brother. I knew you'd want to see your precious subordinates one last time. Father wanted to just blow up the planet, but your dear younger brother thought specifically of you. Cooler turned around to see Frieza in his fourth form, pointing a finger right at him. What is the meaning of this? Why would you decimate my forces, Frieza? Cooler was clenching his fists, and as much as he wanted to believe his brother was a good person, at the moment, he also wanted to pound him into the ground. This? Well, this is all just pruning the tree of our empire, getting rid of some unwanted branches, King Cold said as he exited Frieza's ship. So you're behind this, corrupting my younger brother and turning him against me. This elicited a small chuckle from both Frieza and Cold, before the former stepped forward. Oh no, brother, I've always disliked you. See, you always presented a threat to my empire, to my rule of this universe. But of course, you do have the chance to kneel and call me your lord. The Emperor shot a death beam straight at Cooler's chest, though it was deflected without much trouble. No, I know how it is, Frieza. I know he's pushed you to become this way, to be the evil and uncaring tyrant he always wanted, but you don't have to be. But all of Cooler's words fell on deaf ears, as Frieza charged his brother and began fighting him. The Elder Iceling was in utter shock at how powerful his brother was. Had he been training for this fight too? Maybe Frieza really was just as cruel as their father. Maybe he was even the perfect son in Cold's eyes. Cooler had indeed been training for this day, working on his fighting technique and increasing his strength. But with the loss of his men, and having learnt the true evil that his brother embodied, Cooler's mind was too unfocused to fight. Besides the lack of focus though, Frieza was far stronger than his elder brother, and it showed. Even when holding back, Frieza was casually slapping Cooler around, beating and battering him without a care in the world. Father said you were weak, but I thought you'd at least pose some risk to me. Perhaps this is why your men were so cowardly, begging for their lives and crying when they saw me transform. Why, you... Cooler, using the last of his ki, would blast the Emperor with a flash lancer. While the blast wasn't particularly deadly, it did cause Frieza to step back. Once Cooler got a good look at his brother, he saw that the blast actually managed to put a nasty gash on his face, something that appalled Cold. Now this, it made the Emperor absolutely livid, and he began stomping, kicking, and stepping on Cooler, no longer holding back. After a few minutes, Frieza stepped back and held a finger in front of Cooler's face. Any last words, elder brother? Maybe a plea for your life. You'll get what's coming to you. This caused Frieza to frown, as his finger glowed a familiar pink. However, this is where Cold steps in, grabbing Frieza's hand and stopping him. The tyrant told Frieza to leave Cooler, that they'd simply blow up the planet instead. The Emperor, of course, preferred to watch Cooler fade into the ether, but Cold practically yelled at him to back away. The two tyrants walked back to their ship, and minutes later, Cooler watched as a massive supernova descended upon the planet. For as much pain as Cooler was in, and as scared as he was to pass on, he was happy that at least Salza, Dore, and Naze would survive. Not to mention that Bardock fellow. He seemed like the rebellious type. Yeah, even if he died, at least the rebellion would live on. As the planet was engulfed in flames and eventually blown apart, Cold watched on. While Frieza was laughing and having the time of his life, Cold's expression was deadpan, if not perhaps a little melancholic. This was just like with his own elder brother back then. Cold wondered if his own father felt this exact way when Frigid was dealt with. Well, at least Frieza's empire was safe now. Well, there were those pesky monkeys to deal with, but they weren't much trouble. Besides, they still had a week before their extermination. And that is where we'll be leaving things off for right now. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, maybe consider death beaming that like button, or perhaps even flash lancing that subscribe button. But even if you don't, I appreciate you for watching this far into the video. It's taken me like a week to write this script, but I'm actually pretty happy about it. I hope you guys like this because I have a pretty epic adventure planned out. Well, sorta. And of course I have to thank every one of you guys for subscribing who do subscribe. At the moment we're almost at 400, and I think by the time this video comes out we will either be right below or almost like right at 400. So thank you in advance if you guys get me there before this video comes out or as it gets out. If not, well, I think I'll have the Raditz one out, and that would be pretty perfect. We started it out with 300, and then we get to like part 3 for 400. That'd be pretty cool. Anyways, you guys have a good day or night wherever you are. That's it for now. Bye bye.